You must understand that the relationship between the empath and the narcissist is not simply an accident of attraction, but an ancient choreography written into the deeper structures of the psyche. Imagine it as a theater where the unconscious stages its timeless dramas. On one side, a mirror polished to clarity, capable of reflecting the world without distortion. On the other, a mirror that bends, twists, and reshapes reality to serve a hidden hunger. This is the dance of the empath and the narcissist. A dance older than any spoken word, unfolding in the silence between hearts. The empath enters with openness, often not as a choice but as an instinct, a way of being. Their sensitivity makes them a vessel of receptivity, mirroring back to others what is pure, offering compassion without demand. The narcissist, by contrast, does not reflect but refracts, turning every interaction into an opportunity to feed the insatiable void left by long-buried wounds. When these two meet, it feels mythic, as though destiny itself has woven their paths into a single thread. Light and shadow converging, compassion pressed against hunger, the innocent colliding with the trickster. But there comes a moment, rare, electrifying, and alchemical, when the empath begins to perceive not just words, but the secret language beneath them. This language is not spoken in syllables but in vibrations, the tremor of tone, the tightening of the gaze, the energy of silence itself. To know it is not to mimic or manipulate, but to see through the mask into the child exiled within. A child who learned to protect its fragility by layering charm, arrogance, or grandeur as armor. The empath does not just notice the words, but the spaces between them. The pauses that hide fear. The gestures that reveal longing. This shift transforms everything. No longer merely the dreamer inside another's dream, the empath awakens into lucidity. They see the architecture of illusion, as if suddenly standing above a labyrinth they once wandered blindly. What was once confusion becomes pattern. What felt like chaos begins to appear as choreography. The narcissist's tactics, once irresistible, are exposed as rehearsed lines in an old play. And in that revelation, the empath realizes that they are not condemned to remain cast in the same role. They are not just audience, not just actor. They are capable of rewriting the script. This is the promise and the danger of the opening act. It begins with fascination, to see through masks, to understand the unspoken dialect of wounds, to hold a secret map of defenses and desires. But fascination can become intoxication, and here lies the first caution. Learning the shadow's tongue must not tempt you into wearing the shadow's mask. Jung would warn that to know the shadow is to risk identifying with it. The empath must carry this awareness carefully, holding the knowledge without letting it corrupt, standing rooted in the self while navigating another's unconscious. And so the opening section of this long unfolding tale does not simply describe the bond between empath and narcissist. It calls you to witness the mythic foundation of that bond. It names the polarity of light and distortion, the dance of giving and grasping, the archetypal play of innocent and trickster. It reminds you that what seems like chaos is in fact a pattern written into the deep unconscious, and that awakening begins when you glimpse the hidden grammar of the exchange. Before we go deeper, take a moment to breathe with this awareness. If you are listening right now, let me invite you to share in the comments where in the world you are watching from, and what time of day it is for you. This channel, Carl Jung Stories Unveiled, is a gathering place for souls who are tracing their own journeys through shadow and light. If you have not already, subscribe and turn on notifications so you do not miss the next stages of this unfolding narrative. Now, as we continue, remember this. The first act has placed you inside the archetypal theater. You have seen the mirrors, one clear and one distorted. You have felt the tension between openness and hunger, and you have sensed the moment when the empath begins to awaken, to hear the language of silence and shadow. From here, the path leads forward, into the subtle and often perilous art of actually learning to speak that unspoken language, and to live lucid inside the dream that once held you captive. The moment you begin to grasp the unspoken language of the narcissist, something subtle yet seismic stirs within you. What once felt like a storm of unpredictable moods or baffling contradictions becomes a pattern you can trace. Their charm, their sudden withdrawal, their explosive anger, their calculated silence, these are not random. They are words in a dialect you had not yet learned. And when you begin to perceive that dialect, you move from confusion into clarity, from being a passive participant in their theater to a lucid witness of its architecture. This language is woven of silences and tones, of pauses that scream louder than words, of eyes that narrow when truth comes too close. It is a grammar of wounds, rehearsed since childhood by a self that learned survival through performance. The narcissist does not speak with words alone. They speak through energy, the tightening of shoulders, the calculated delay of a reply. To hear them is to read constellations in the night sky. The stars are visible to all, but only those with knowledge can perceive the stories between them. You, the empath, begin to read these constellations. The discovery is intoxicating. You realize that every sigh, every shift in posture, every fluctuation in tone reveals a hidden line of script, and you recognize the mask as a costume, not a face. Beneath it lies the wounded child, trembling, long exiled into shame. The narcissist's armor of arrogance or seduction was never strength. It was scaffolding. To learn their language is to hold the blueprint of that scaffolding, to see where it bends, where it threatens to collapse. But this shift is not simply intellectual. It is experiential, almost dreamlike. Many empaths first sense it in actual dreams, standing in a foreign land, surrounded by words they do not recognize, yet somehow understanding them. Or looking into a mirror and seeing not their own face but a mask that speaks in riddles. These are not random images. They are rehearsals staged by the unconscious, training you to decipher symbolic grammar. Jung reminded us that the unconscious always speaks in images before it speaks in thoughts. In learning the narcissist's language, you are also learning the language of the unconscious itself. When the narcissist senses this awakening, the reaction is visceral. It is like being seen without clothing for the first time. Their entire identity is built on the ability to control perception, to curate what is seen and what is hidden. And when you mirror back not the mask, but the wound beneath it, they feel terror and rage in equal measure. They may intensify their tactics, tightening control through charm, guilt, or aggression. But your awareness shifts the balance. What once hooked deeply into your unguarded heart now slides away, as though the flesh of your psyche has become mirror smooth. Here lies both the power and the danger. To speak their language is to walk into their labyrinth without being deceived by its twists. But to do so without losing yourself requires vigilance. You are not meant to become the narcissist, not meant to wield their tools for your own domination. To learn their language is not to inhabit their world fully, but to understand its rules so you may walk free of them. The temptation is real, the sudden thrill of reversal, of watching the one who controlled you flinch under your clarity. Yet this temptation is the very trap Jung warned against, identifying with the shadow you sought to integrate. The true task is more demanding: to hold the knowledge without letting it corrode your center, to remain rooted in your own self, even as you navigate another's unconscious, to speak fluently, but to choose silence when silence is the wiser word. For silence, as you will later learn, is the most disarming language of all. And so, this section teaches that the empath's awakening is not merely a personal triumph, it is a reconfiguration of the entire dynamic. Once you learn to read the hidden signals, the narcissist is no longer the sole author of the script. They may continue to perform, but you no longer react blindly. You have begun to speak fluently in the tongue of wounds, energy, and silence. This fluency will be tested in archetypal realms, where the narcissist is revealed not merely as a villain, but as a wounded trickster, a broken king or queen. While you must decide whether to stand as healer, innocent, or something more sovereign, the next step in our journey takes us into that archetypal field, where mythic figures emerge behind personal faces. The narcissist becomes more than an individual. They become an emblem of the fractured self, the trickster who masks unbearable smallness with grandeur. And you, the empath, discover that your archetype is not only healer of others, but potential healer of yourself. In the archetypal realm, the narcissist ceases to be only a person in your life and begins to reveal themselves as a living emblem, a mythic figure wearing human clothes. Jung called this the power of archetypes, energies older than time, playing out through us as actors on a stage far larger than our individual biographies. In this stage of awakening, the narcissist emerges as the trickster, or the wounded king or queen, and the empath is drawn into the polarity as healer, innocent, or dreamer. What once felt like a painful relationship becomes recognizable as a drama scripted in the collective unconscious. The trickster archetype is always double-edged. On the surface, it is charming, witty, unpredictable. But beneath the laughter and bravado is a wound, the collapse of unity within the self. The narcissist's mask of grandiosity is not strength, but camouflage, a way to shield the unbearable smallness they feel inside. When you recognize this, you begin to see through the trickster's performance. What looked like cruelty often reveals itself as defense, the strike of a cornered animal, the desperate attempt of a psyche to protect its fragile core. On the other side, the empath embodies the archetype of the healer or the innocent. You carry the ability to step into darkness without recoiling, to offer a presence that does not turn away from pain. This is why the narcissist is drawn to you, not because they wish to destroy you, at least not initially, but because they crave the warmth of a soul that does not shrink from intimacy. They drink from your openness as though from a well, tasting for a moment what it is to be whole. Yet over time, their hunger grows, and your energy wanes. What began as archetypal complementarity descends into parasitism. This parasitic turn is critical to understand. The empath, unaware of their own patterns, may give until they become an empty chalice. The compulsion to heal, to offer, to hold, is not pure virtue. It too is archetypal. It often hides a wound, the fear of abandonment, the belief that love must be earned through sacrifice. Here we see the mirror twist back. The narcissist hides smallness with masks of grandeur. The empath hides fear with masks of generosity. Both are disguises born of wounds. Both are archetypal defenses learned long before either party met. When you, the empath, realize this, a profound shift occurs. The archetypes stop being unconscious roles that script your life. They become symbols you can work with, energies you can integrate. Jung warned that archetypes in their raw form possess us, but once integrated, they enrich us. The trickster is not merely the manipulator. It is also the bringer of transformation, the one who unsettles stale structures. The healer is not merely the selfless caregiver. It is also the one who must heal themselves first. It is at this point that the balance of power begins to tilt. The narcissist senses, often without words, that you are no longer responding to the mask. You mirror back the wound beneath it, and for them, this is intolerable. Their strategies to charm, guilt, or dominate lose their grip because you have begun to see the archetype at work. You are no longer in thrall to the personal drama alone. You recognize its mythic backdrop. And in recognizing it, you are freed from being unconsciously cast. Yet freedom brings danger as well. The archetypal field is powerful, seductive. To stand in the role of healer with newfound clarity may tempt you to reverse the polarity, to control rather than to care, to wield your insight as a weapon. This temptation is itself the shadow side of the healer archetype, the magician who misuses the forbidden spell. If you slip into this, you risk becoming the very mask you once despised. The line between illumination and domination can be as thin as a whisper. The task, then, is delicate: to acknowledge the archetypes without being swallowed by them, to recognize the trickster and the narcissist without demonizing them, and to honor the healer within yourself without idealizing your compulsion to give. Archetypes, when faced, become tools for individuation. They no longer dictate the play. They become actors whose roles you can rewrite. And so, this section reminds us that archetypes do not absolve responsibility. They illuminate it. They show us that what looks like personal conflict is part of a larger drama, and that both empath and narcissist are playing roles scripted by wounds. The shift of power occurs not because you overpower the narcissist, but because you cease to unconsciously perform your assigned part. You see the myth and step out of its grip. From here, the journey deepens into even subtler terrain. The archetypes have opened your eyes to the mythic structure, but now you must learn to apply that clarity to the micro level of daily life. Dreams intensify, offering rehearsals for awakening. You begin to notice the smallest shifts, the pause before a lie, the tightening around the eyes, the subtle pressure drop before a storm of rage. The next stage teaches you to read these micro-signals, as if deciphering the weather patterns of another soul. Dreams are often the first rehearsals of awakening. Before you consciously grasp what is unfolding, your psyche begins to prepare you through images that feel foreign yet familiar. You may dream of wandering in a strange country where the language seems indecipherable, yet somehow you understand every word. Or you may stand before a mirror, only to see not your own face but a shifting mask that speaks in riddles. These dreams are not random. They are the psyche's training ground, teaching you to decode the symbolic grammar of the narcissist's inner world. Jung would say the unconscious always speaks in images before it speaks in thoughts. Your dreaming mind is trying to help you read what has always been present. The pauses, the shifts in breath, the tightening of muscles around the eyes when truth hovers too close. What once slipped past you unnoticed now becomes legible. The narcissist's moods, which once felt like sudden storms, reveal themselves as weather systems with patterns and warning signs. You begin to sense the drop in pressure before the thunder breaks, to read the invisible barometer of their psyche. This new awareness is like learning to read constellations. The stars have always been there, but now you discern the stories they tell. The narcissist, when they sense you reading their sky, feels a terror akin to being seen without clothing. Their identity depends on controlling how they are perceived, on curating what others are allowed to witness. And when you mirror back not the carefully crafted mask, but the wound beneath it, they feel both fear and rage. Their instinct is to regain control, to reassert dominance through charm, guilt, seduction, or aggression. Yet something fundamental has shifted. The hooks that once found easy purchase in your unguarded heart now slide off as though your surface has become smooth glass. Their words, once penetrating, no longer lodge inside you. You hear the tone, the silence, the manipulative cadence, and you recognize them as rehearsed moves. Recognition is liberation. You may still feel the impact, but it does not bind you. Awareness has created distance, and distance is the seed of freedom, but this stage requires care. To know their language, to anticipate their storms, is a strange power, and power is always double-edged. There is a temptation to wield it, to turn insight into control, to flip the script and use their own tactics against them. This is the shadow's lure. Jung warned that to understand the shadow is to risk identification with it. If you begin to enjoy the reversal too much, to savor their disorientation under your clarity, you may find yourself wearing the very mask you once sought to strip away. The challenge is to hold the knowledge without being corrupted by it, to remain rooted in your own center while navigating the labyrinth of another's unconscious. This requires humility and vigilance. For just as the narcissist hides a trembling child beneath grandiosity, you too may hide a wounded child beneath compulsive giving. The dream rehearsals remind you. You are learning not just their language, but your own. And here is where the true work begins. As you decipher the subtle weather of another's soul, you are also called to notice the weather within yourself. What storms do you anticipate? Where do your own barometers drop, alerting you to fears of rejection or abandonment? The narcissist becomes a mirror of your hidden chambers, not so you can condemn yourself, but so you can integrate what you had denied. The empath's dream of decoding another becomes, inevitably, the dream of decoding the self. This stage teaches that awareness is not just a shield, it is a compass. To read another's unconscious patterns is to see how your own patterns resonate. To understand that just as their cruelty is rarely random, your giving is rarely selfless. Both follow archetypal scripts, and both can be rewritten. So, as you move forward, carry this paradox. In learning to read their signals, you must also learn to read your own. Dreams and micro-signals lead not only to clarity about them, but to deeper clarity about you. The next step will bring this truth into sharper focus, showing how the healer's wound can become a snare, and how the risk of power must be balanced by the responsibility of integration. Every empath, sooner or later, discovers that their healing impulse is not born only of compassion, but of a wound. Beneath the generosity, beneath the reflex to give endlessly, lies a fear of abandonment, of being unseen, of becoming unworthy if not constantly useful. You may believe that love must be earned through sacrifice, that your place in another's life depends on your capacity to soothe their pain. This belief is not random. It is the architecture of your own shadow. The narcissist did not invent your vulnerability. They simply found it. The danger of learning the narcissist's language is that you can become enthralled by its potency. Suddenly you see the machinery behind their mask, the defenses, the hungers, the pressure points. For the first time, you can anticipate their moves, deflect their hooks, even turn their tactics back upon them. This reversal can feel exhilarating. It can feel like justice. Yet this is the most perilous temptation, to become the very thing you once despised. Jung warned of this clearly. To understand the shadow is to risk identification with it, What begins as awareness can corrode into manipulation if you delight too much in your newfound fluency. The healer's shadow is the magician's trap. The desire to use knowledge not for illumination, but for control. You might rationalize it, telling yourself you are teaching them a lesson or protecting yourself by striking first. But each time you lean into this power, you step closer to the mask. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the empath can become the shadow they once fled. This is why discernment is vital. The work is not to win at the narcissist's game, but to refuse to play it at all. The truth is humbling. Your compulsive giving, your refusal to say no, your need to be needed. These are as much survival strategies as the narcissist's grandiosity. Their arrogance shields their shame. Your selflessness shields your fear of rejection. Both are masks, both are defenses, both born of the wounded child. To truly learn their language, you must also learn your own. You must stand before your own mirror and ask, why was I drawn to this dance? What archetype within me sought completion in their darkness? This question is not meant to shame you. It is meant to liberate you. For when you see your own pattern, you cease to feed it unconsciously. The narcissist no longer has a ready-made opening, because the wound that once kept you in orbit begins to heal. Integration of shadow begins with honesty. To admit that your giving was not always pure, that it was sometimes bargaining, sometimes fear, sometimes the desperate attempt to be indispensable. Once you recognize this, compassion deepens. You no longer see yourself as the innocent victim of their cruelty, nor do you see them as the monster who ruined you. Instead, you see two wounded children meeting in the archetypal theater. One hiding pain behind control, the other hiding fear behind self-sacrifice. And this seeing shifts everything. It does not excuse harm, but it explains the compulsions that bound you together. At this stage, you realize the real risk is not outside, but inside. The risk is that you will mistake power for healing, control for freedom, reversal for growth. The real task is to refuse identification with the mask, whether theirs or your own. To keep your center intact even while navigating the labyrinth. To say no without guilt. To give without compulsion. To step away without collapsing into shame. The empath's wound, once exposed, becomes a threshold. To cross it is to step into sovereignty, where you can hold knowledge without letting it poison you, where you can walk through shadow without being consumed by it. This is the preparation for individuation, the stage where you integrate your shadow, stand firmly in your own center, and no longer define yourself against the narcissist at all. As the story continues, the next step reveals how silence itself becomes your most potent language. How choosing not to engage, not to react, not to perform the old contract of control and submission is the very essence of sovereignty. Silence, paradoxically, is the loudest word you will ever speak. Silence, once a sign of fear or confusion, becomes the most fluent language you can speak when you have integrated the shadow. For the narcissist, silence is intolerable. Their entire system is built on reaction, to provoke, to charm, to guilt, to draw energy through any means. When you cease to react, the script collapses. The lines they have rehearsed for years echo into emptiness, and in that void, you discover a new dimension of sovereignty. Silence is not passive. It is the refusal to engage in the old contract of control and submission. It is the moment when you no longer feed the dynamic with your energy, when you no longer barter pieces of yourself for the illusion of harmony. To stand silently is not to withdraw into fear, but to stand rooted in clarity. Jung might call this the stance of the magician, not the manipulator who bends others, but the alchemist who transforms suffering into wisdom. At this stage, the narcissist may intensify their tactics. They may reach for seduction, rage, guilt, even sudden displays of tenderness. They may attempt a grand gesture of apology, one that feels almost genuine, or evoke memories of the history you shared. Yet your silence, your calm awareness, reveals these attempts for what they are: survival maneuvers, not true transformation. You recognize the difference, and you no longer confuse performance with change. The power of this silence is that it does not seek to destroy the narcissist. It seeks only to protect your center. You no longer imagine you can heal them. You no longer mistake glimpses of their fragile self for promises of growth. Instead, you honor the fleeting moments when the mask slips without clinging to them. Your task is not to dismantle their defenses, but to walk your path with eyes open, carrying the knowledge that you can now see through veils others mistake for reality. This clarity is irreversible. Once you have seen the architecture of illusion, you cannot unsee it. Once you have heard the words beneath the words, silence is no longer empty but full of meaning. Your dreams echo this shift. A birdcage door swinging open, a ship setting sail after long repair, a coat falling away after winter. In these images, your psyche tells you that the old contract has dissolved. The narcissist may still appear, may still attempt the same maneuvers, but they no longer land. Their hooks cannot find wounds that have healed. And this is individuation in its most intimate form. You cease to define yourself in relation to their tides. Your compass points inward, steady toward the self, the archetypal center that holds both light and shadow without collapsing into either. Relationship remains important, but it is no longer a prison of mirrors. It is a field of mirrors where you can discern without being ensnared. You recognize the narcissist as a chapter in your story, not the author of your book. Here, the archetypal drama dissolves. The empath no longer exists to soothe the narcissist's wound, nor as the victim of their cruelty. You walk on, not empty, but whole. You can speak to shadows without being consumed by them. You can stand before manipulation without collapsing into reaction. You have reclaimed presence, and presence is the greatest language of all. This section closes with a paradox. The narcissist once orchestrated the stage, but when you withdraw from the script, the strings fall slack. They are left with words that no longer echo, gestures that no longer bind. What feels to them like abandonment is, in truth, your emancipation. It is not rebellion in the noisy sense, but rebellion in its quietest and most terrifying form. Grounded, irreversible, sovereign, and so, silence is revealed as the alchemy of freedom. From here, the journey does not end but expands into a conclusion where we will gather the threads. The ancient dance, the hidden language, the archetypal roles, the dreams and weather signs, the healer's wound, and the silence that crowns individuation. Together, they converge into the final realization that learning the narcissist's language was never about mastering them. It was always about unlocking yourself. The language you have learned was never truly theirs. It was always pointing back to you. At first, it felt as though the narcissist held the script, the stage, the spotlight. They directed the dance, pulling the strings while you responded reflexively. But as you awakened to the hidden grammar of silence, gesture, and archetype, the stage changed. You discovered that what you thought was their private tongue was, in fact, the language of the shadow itself. And in learning to hear it, you learned to hear your own. This is the great paradox of individuation. The narcissist, who seemed to diminish you, became the unlikely catalyst for your expansion. Their manipulation exposed where your boundaries were porous, where your need for recognition left you vulnerable, where your fear of abandonment was silently steering your choices. Without intending to, they became the mirror that forced you to confront what you had not yet integrated. They taught you, through pain, where the unhealed parts of you still lived, and in doing so, they gave you the material for your transformation. But the liberation does not end in resentment or revenge. It ends in sovereignty. When you no longer react as before, when their words slide past you like echoes in an empty hall, you realize the contract has been burned. The stage they built for domination no longer holds you. The game is over, not because you defeated them on their terms, but because you stepped beyond the arena entirely. You are no longer playing, and in that refusal, you reclaim the most precious gift, your presence. Silence here is not absence. It is presence filled with clarity. It is the choice to respond only from awareness, never from compulsion. It is the stillness after the door closes on an old life, a stillness that at first feels foreign because so much of your energy once went to anticipating, decoding, surviving. Yet as you breathe into it, you discover it is not emptiness, it is spaciousness. It is the room of your life, no longer cluttered by illusions. Jung wrote that the greatest privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And you cannot become who you are while bound in the mirrored illusions of another. To see through those illusions is not to destroy them, it is to walk past them without being caught. You remain capable of compassion, but it is no longer compulsive. You can recognize the trembling child behind the narcissist's mask without trying to rescue them, because you have already rescued your own. This is individuation at its core. To integrate shadow without being possessed by it, to carry both light and darkness within you without collapsing into either. The narcissist remains a character in your story, but they are no longer the axis of it. They are a chapter, not the whole book. The authorship has returned to your hands, so the final truth is simple and profound. When the narcissist realizes you have learned their language, what they truly sense is not their exposure, but your emancipation. Their words no longer bind. Their silence no longer manipulates. Their masks no longer deceive. You stand as a sovereign presence, no longer playing their script, speaking with the cadence of your own soul. And from here, your story expands, not defined by what drained you, but by what you have become. Whole, clear, unbound.